This is a big box of poo. 3D printed poo at least, and it's very fragrant. And this, which I'm not going to pour on my table, is a lot, and mostly caused by the Bambu Lab AMS multi-filament, multi-material printer, the AMS Lite as well. And anyone who's used one of these multi-material printers knows that there is a lot of waste associated with it. In this video, I'm going to talk to you about some of the techniques that I've learned along the way. Some of them aren't perfect, some of them are pretty damned good, and there are probably 1,000,001 other ones out there as well that help you to reduce the waste that comes out of these printers, or at least the multi-material printing side of things. If you've got any extra ones that you know of, throw them down in the comments below, because I'm sure there will be plenty of people who want to know, how do you cut down on this? Because I've got a good couple of kilograms of waste right here, and it's a lot, and taken a lot of experimenting for me to get something that is pretty close to not being massively wasteful. So throughout this video, I am probably going to refer to these multicolour switches or multi-material switches like the AMS and the AMS Lite for the Bambu Lab printers. And there are also other brands of printers now that have their own that do basically the same thing as multicolour printers and multicolour changes. I know it's multi-material, but for me, I just primarily use PLA, and it's literally just for switching colours, and I always get it wrong. So you're gonna have to live with that. I just can't change myself. I'm so sorry, I've tried. Also, everything that I'm doing in this video is primarily with PLA. I've not been using ABS or any other fancy types of materials, so as well bear that in mind. Some of these might not work as well for other types of materials. So again, just trial and error. Some of these things will work better for different types of material. Now, the first tip that I have is one that I learned when I very first got the Bambu Lab and the AMS, is ideally that you want to pack your plate, your bed, all of that with as many of the same object that has the same colors in. Because what this will do is this will swap just once. So even if you have just one tiny little thing that is switching colors, or you have a build plate that's filled with like 10 or 20 of the same object, so long as they are all switching to the same color at the same time, at the same layer height, you'll just have that one color change for every single one of those models. So for example, if you have a model that is 50 grams and it wastes 50 grams of filament during that purge and that flushing process, and then you repeat it 10 times. So now you've got 500 grams worth of actual filament that's being used on the model. You still only have that 50 grams of waste because it only has to do the color change once per 10 models rather than just the one. It's a really handy thing to do. If you're printing them for kids, for example, and you need a whole bunch of them, it's worthwhile doing. If you are printing them to sell, for example, if you're doing some articulated dragons or something like that, then again, you want to pack your bed with as many of the same object with the same colors as you possibly can, because that helps to reduce some waste. The next one, and this one isn't groundbreaking at all, but a lot of these models also come in multi-parts. So you get the 3MF file, and then you can obviously choose your colors and everything else, and then it will print them all off in those colors that you've got. But from like Zo3D, where they've got like these printed ghosts, they do loads of their models now in separate parts. So their eyes are separate, like the horns on unicorns separate, and the tails are separate and stuff like that. So you can print them all off in black first, so you have like the body all in white, and then the tail all in purple. That's the easiest way to do it. It means you've got some assembly afterwards, but that's probably the way to have as least waste as possible when it comes to multicolor printing. It's not really a tip, it's more of a common sense type thing, but it is kind of incredible how many people don't actually know that those multicolor files also come in parts as well. So double check and see whether or not they come in parts, and you can print them in parts. Just helps save some waste. So now on to the more complex, or less known, at least less known to me, about 3 weeks ago when I picked up a new AMS Lite for my A1 printer. I've been playing around with settings and trying to reduce the waste as best I can, and these are some things that I found. Also, these came up when I was looking at bleed issues. I was having issues with bleeding colors between dark colors to light colors, so hopefully this will help to fix some of those issues if you are having them as well. The first one, which has very mixed opinions, is flush to infill. So this is a setting you can enable when you right click onto your model, and it will have flush options in Bambu Studio. What this will do is it will, instead of flushing your color and causing all of this tasty poop, it will flush those colors, which are now on my desk, into the infill of the model. Now this has benefits because it helps to reduce waste. It means that you're not using the primary color that you want to keep as the infill. It basically, color that would have been wasted and purged and flushed is now inside of the model, so that way you're using less filament overall. The main issue that I've seen with this, and I have had it in the past when I've tried it as well, is if you are switching between dark and light colors, if you get a dark color that is filling up your infill, but a light color on the outside. So say for example, you've got a white eye on a dragon or something like that, but you've got black on the inside and it's putting all the infill on there. You then have the issue that there could potentially be some bleed, or that you'll be able to see that more darker or more vibrant color on the inside and through the shell of basically the external part of your print. And there's a couple of ways around this. Obviously, you could try to use colors that aren't going to contrast so much. You're not going to get that really vibrant, bright color inside of it, or that really dark color inside of it. And you can bump up the number of walls as well. So that way it's got thicker external walls on the outside of the model. And hopefully that will stop some of that transparency issue as well. Obviously, again, your mileage may vary. Depends what type of thing that you're printing. Worthwhile trialing it out yourself and seeing how well this works. The next one is one that I didn't even realize was on the printer, which just shows my ignorance when it comes to flushing. But actually, if you click here, I'm going to have a screen grab for you to see. Again, this may be different depending on what type of software that you're using. I'm using Bambu Studio on a MacBook, so that might be different if you're using it on Windows, for example. But if you click up here, basically it gives you all of your options for flushing volumes. Now you can lower these or you can increase these. You can manually customize these as well if you want to. And I will have a file linked down below that you can use, and it has a guide on how to use this. And basically what it will do is help you to figure out how low you can take this value so that way you purge and flush less filament before you start getting bleed between different colors. So for example, of this dinosaur that I've got here, it had this obviously black eye and the white around it. And where it's printing the black, I lowered the flush volumes. And that meant that it wasn't flushing enough of the black, which meant I got some bleed. You can see that on the bleed on the white. So instead of being white, it's more of a grey colour instead. So you can play around with these settings on this. But what you can do is you can take those Bambu Lab default ones, which tend to be quite safe in the amount of filament that they're flushing. And you can gradually lower these down and down and down, so that way you get less amount of filament flushed. So you have to play around with it depending on the type of filament you're using, the type of settings you're using. There's loads of different things here that can affect it. But using this like validation file, you can kind of figure that out for yourself and find out what values work best for you. A couple of tips to play around with when you are doing this is you can change the print order for your settings. So where I mentioned there about having that dinosaur, having that bleed, you can change it so it will print the internal wall and the infill before it prints the external wall. And the benefit here is if it hasn't flushed enough of like the dark color, it will then fill up that internal wall first, and then it'll start doing the infill, or do the infill and then the internal wall. I can't quite remember what setting I've got it on. And then it'll do the external wall. And hopefully if your model is large enough, or if it's then used enough filament there, any of that gray, which is then gradually turning to white, will be white by the time it gets to that external wall. So that's something to play with. Again, you can bump up the number of walls that you're using, and that will hopefully again cover up any of those imperfections that you've got where you might have some bleed. The next one is an experimental feature that isn't enabled by default on Bambu Lab, which is kind of surprising because since I've enabled it, it's made a massive difference to the amount of waste I've had, but also it's affected the amount of bleed that I've had. So by enabling this, you can then start to lower the amount you are flushing. So you combine this one with the previous one I've just spoken about. By enabling this, you can then lower the amount your machine needs to flush. And what this does is you will need to go into your settings. And again, I'll try and have a screen grab up on screen, and it might be different depending on the software you're using. You then go to like your experimental settings and you enable this. And it is a retraction for flush. Now on default, you will have your nozzle. And once you finish printing in white, for example, it will then leave that amount of filament in there. Leave it in the whole nozzle right down to the end. It might pull it back just ever so slightly. And then the slicer will obviously do its magical thing. It goes and it makes the cut, which means you're losing about X amount of filament. And hopefully that's showing up on camera, because otherwise I just look crazy. So you lose that amount of filament. And then on top of that, it then purges that out, and then it flushes, I don't know, however much you've got set in those settings, amount of filament out as well. Now with this retraction setting, what it does, instead of just leaving that amount of filament in there, it pulls it up. So you can set the amount or the length that it's going to pull it up. And once it's going to do that layer change, it will then retract the filament and gradually pull it up, pulls it up to about there, so that way you're not getting that rough end. And then it makes the cut, which means you're saving a lot more filament between every single layer change. On the surface, that doesn't look like it will save much. But if you were doing a lot of layer changes, that much filament over hundreds of potential layer changes is a lot, and it adds up. And it also means that when it comes to that flushing and all the purging, you're less likely to get bleed, which has been a massive impact when it comes to the way I've been printing. It's helped me probably the most out of all of these tips that I've used, because it's helped me to eliminate bleed between dark to light colors. It's also helped me to cut down on filament waste as well, which is a big, big win. And the last one on the list is the newest one that I've been experimenting with. I really like this one. It's a lot of fun. It takes a little bit more involvement with this, is you can put on some additional models on your build plate. So say, for example, you've got a really big articulated dragon, or you've got a couple of littler dragons, but you can't fit like 10 of them. You can only get 2 dragons on there or 1. There's just, physics gets in the way. Bambu Lab are refusing to bring out a bigger printer, and you can only get so much onto that build plate. But you do still have some room around there. What you can do is you can obviously position things how you like it, and then you can add some additional models. And what models they might be, that's obviously down to you. I've used some additional like fidget toys, some like Zo Ghosts. I've also got these like little fidget frogs and these fidget caterpillars and just loads of random stuff. I'm going to put a load of like infinity cubes, and there's loads of like Mathlink cubes as well that I can print off. So basically you put them onto your build plate, you right click on them, and then you go to flush options and you select flush to object. And what this will do, instead of flushing all of that wasted filament that would have gone into the waste and been flung away, it will flush all of that into those extra models you've got. So you can fill your build plate up as much or as little as you want. And instead of having wasted filament, it will then flush it all into these models. Now there's a couple of considerations here. It's not perfect by any means because they will look a little bit random. But I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing if they're going to be toys like these Mathlink cubes that I want to do, or just random fidgets. There's loads of things that you can do with these. My kids will, first off, they will just absolutely love them. I can donate them to my school. There's just loads of things there that I can do with these. But the more important thing is you might actually end up using more filament doing this, so you need to keep an eye on it. First thing you need to do is try to get models that are roughly the same size as your purge tower, because otherwise you're still going to get a lot of wasted filament once you get above the model printing, because it then still needs to flush it and purge it somewhere. Also, there will be times where it just doesn't have enough to flush at a certain layer. If you printed something that's got loads of models down at the bottom layers, it doesn't actually need to flush that much. You might find that you start wasting more filament than you want to. The way I've been getting around this, it doesn't take too much time and is a little bit more involved, is I will look at the calculations for my model just on its own. I'll take a screenshot of that so I can see how much is getting flushed, how much has been used total for the model, and then how much has been used in complete total for the whole project. I then start to add a few things on there. What you should start seeing then is that the amount you are flushing starts to go down. So the gram weightage should go down and the amount that is printed in the model should start to go up. And that's because that's the amount that's actually getting printed into physical models rather than wasted. And ideally, the total amount should stay roughly the same. You want to keep tinkering with this and hope that that wastage value should go down, model value should go up, and you want to try and keep the total roughly the same as what you started. What you might start to find though is as that wastage goes down, model goes up, the total might also start to increase as well, because like I said, there's going to be some points in that total layer where there wouldn't have been enough wasted filament to fill up those extra models you've got. So it then uses filament that you otherwise wouldn't have printed. It's just trying to find a really good balance between that and strike that. But I think it's a great little tip for anyone who's got kids or can donate these things, or even if you're selling them, you could have a whole bunch of purge objects that look really funky and unique, and they're saving waste. It's worthwhile giving a go. The other thing to consider when you're doing this is it will bump up the project time as well, because there's going to be movement of that print head. Instead of this being there and just basically pooping out and flushing and then moving, it's also got to move around the print bed to do those additional models as well. In my experience, it doesn't add much time on a large project, but it can add a couple of hours on when I'm doing something like an articulated dragon. So again, if time is really important to you and electricity prices and stuff like that are really high where you are, then it could have a bearing on obviously your decision to do this. So those are my tips for cutting down some of the waste when it comes to multicolor printing. Unfortunately, in its current design, at least which Bambu Lab use, it is quite a wasteful process. But like I said, you can use some of those tips. Some of them will work for you, some of them might not work for you, and combined together, you can get some really decent things that help to cut down some waste. But it is more wasteful, unfortunately. There are other machines out there, which is like, obviously you've got multi-tool head machines, which look really interesting because they have far less waste. But at the moment, Bambu Lab just don't have that. So hopefully that video has helped some of you out there. If you are doing like your multicolor printing and you want to cut down on some waste, fingers crossed there's a few things in there that will help you. I've been playing around for the past 3 or 4 weeks now with the AMS Lite on my A1 printer to see just how well I can get that wastage down, how well I can cut out things like bleed and stuff like that. And I feel like I'm finally at the stage where with a combination of these settings, I've pretty much got it perfect, which is great. I, absolutely love it. So thanks for watching. Hopefully that's helped a few of you out there. If you've got any additional comments or tips or tricks to share about cutting down waste, throw them down in the comments below. I mentioned it's always handy to learn some new things. I've been learning loads of new things, and there's probably about 1,000,001 things that I just don't know yet. So it's always worth sharing those. In the meantime, stay safe. Hopefully I will see you in the next one. Enjoy your poop for now. Bye.